Hi, it's Dave Parody. Whenever you're reporting sales, units shipped, customers served, anything where you want to show the values as well as the compound annual growth rate, otherwise known as CAGR, then one of the visuals you can use is this one here where we're showing a CAGR line call out on a column chart. Now, it's important that you don't just draw the line on and put a text box on because as the values change, you want that line to automatically update. And so the way I've built this is to have it automatically update. So for example, if it wasn't 3015 in Q4, let's say it was 3500. When I update that number, you'll notice automatically the graph updates, of course, but the CAGR calculation updates and the line updates. And that's what I want to show you in this video, how to build a chart that has a CAGR line callout on a column chart, but it's all one chart, so it automatically updates. I've reset that last value, and our first step is to actually calculate what is that compound annual growth rate, or CAGR. And what I've done here is I have done the calculation in this cell. Let me zoom in on the formula here. So I'm using this function in Excel called RRI. And it's basically a rate of return given 3 parameters. So I click in, you'll see the parameters, the number of periods, so it's 3 periods because it's Q4 minus Q1 is 3. The starting value, right now, present value, which is the value for Q1, and the future value, which is the last value for Q4. Now, obviously, depending on the data you would change this to match your particular set of data. But that's how we calculate the CAGR. And then what I do right below it, you'll notice I have a number of cells here. Let me just zoom in so you can see this formula here. What I'm doing is I'm actually testing the computed growth rate, and I'm testing to say, does it actually match? And so you'll notice the formula here is I take the previous value, multiply it by 1 plus that growth rate, same growth rate each year. Now, you'll notice that the values I calculate don't match the actual values. Well, that makes sense because this is a growth rate that assumes a straight line, not the actual performance up and down a little bit. It's just making sure, and again, it's not because I don't trust Excel, it's because I want to make sure that the last number, the 3015 calculated, is the same as the last number in the real data. So that's why I make sure that I've got that calculation and I confirm, yes, that's done. So step number 1 is to go ahead and calculate and test the calculation of that CAGR number. Step 2 is to add a couple of other helper cells. Now you notice I have this area titled helper cells. I like to do that in setting up a worksheet for a chart where I have the data table that comes in. Usually that's from some other calculation that I've done or analysis that somebody's done. Pull those numbers in. And then I create helper cells, and then you'll notice we'll get to this, the chart data cells. The reason I separate those areas is because then when this data updates from the source, everything else updates. Now, the next thing I have in the helper cells are these ones here, line distance percentage. Now, I have just short form distance there. What is this? So I have to decide how far from the top of the column will the line, the CAGR line call out, be on the graph. And I set it as a percentage of the maximum column size. And what that does is it allows me to make this variable. So if I find, because my data, maybe it runs over something, I can change this percentage and automatically update. So I use that percentage in this next helper cell, which is the line distance. So this just says, okay, so take the maximum value, multiply it by that percentage that I just had up above. So when I zoom in on the formula here again, you can see it's just taking the maximum of the values and multiplying it by that percentage that I had decided. This gives me flexibility. So second step, set up the distance or the position of this CAGR line callout on the chart. Step 3 is to actually set up the data for the column chart. Now this is pretty simple. I have my chart data section here. I just, my quarters and my units, those are just referencing the cells above. So again, if anything changes, automatically updates. Now, one of the things that you may have to do, and I had to do with this set of data, is to include this extra data series called force 0. What this is doing is Excel has this behavior that what it does is it does not start the vertical axis on a column chart at 0 if the values are close to each other. I've got a whole video on that and how do you solve this, so you can check the link and go and check that video if this is an issue for you. But what it's done is it does force me to have this force 0, which is going to be a single point line chart, which is invisible because a line chart needs 2 points to work. So what this does, though, is it forces the axis to say, oh, there's a value that's not within this small range. I better start at 0. So I set that to 0. So I set up the data for the column chart. Very simple and easy to do that for step 3. Now, step 4 is to set up the actual CAGR line. And the way that this is going to be done, this is down here, and you'll notice I have an X and a Y value. So what the CAGR line is it is a scatter with straight line chart type. And what it allows me to do is it allows me to specify 2 points, and then it draws a line in between those 2 points. And the reason I want to set the X and the Y is that it allows me to determine my starting and ending point of that line based on the data that it's been sent. So what are the X values? The X values here with a column chart are simply the numbers of the columns. So column 1 is where I want it to start, Q1, and I want it to end in column 4. That's why the second X value is 4. The Y values are going to be the position of the line. So remember, we calculated how far above the column we want it to be, set that as a fixed number. So now you'll notice when you take a look here at the formula, I take the value for that particular column and I add that distance that I calculated before in cell I7 here. So this makes sure that the distance between the top of the column and the line is consistent regardless of how high the column is. This is why I don't take the column value and then add some sort of percentage, because I want the slope of the line to reflect the actual slope that it is. And the only way to do that is to have a consistent level above each of those columns. So that's how I set up that next step, which is to put the data together for that CAGR line. Then I have to put together the data for the CAGR callout. So the actual words here that say CAGR and 5.6%. This is, again, another data series, another scatter with line data series. But because it only has 1 point, there's no line to it. Really, all we're doing here is we're using an invisible element to position a visible element. You'll never see this chart, the scatter, the line, but the reason we have it is so that we can place a data label in that exact spot. And the values here, I'm simply using the formulas, I'm simply using the average. So I take the average of starting and ending points for the line in terms of the column numbers. And then for the value, again, I just take the average of the values for the beginning and the end of the line. So notice how we're building some flexibility in here. So we could actually decide, hey, you know what? We don't want the line to start at the first column. Maybe we've got 12 columns and we just want to show the last 6. We could have it start in column 7 and go to column 12. So what this does is it allows us to have this flexibility built into the way that we are building this chart. And that's what I always like to do, is to build as much flexibility as possible into the chart. So that's how we set up the values here. Now, what about the data series name? The data series name here is actually a formula. And so when we take a look at this formula, the data series name takes cell F6, which is the word CAGR. So again, this allows us to have flexibility. If in your organization you call it IRR, well, no problem. Just type that in to the cell F6 and automatically the label updates. And then it adds the colon, the space, and then it adds the percentage. So it takes that CAGR calculated number and turns it into a percentage using the text function. The text function takes a cell that's a number and uses the number formats in Excel to turn it into a number that you want. So here it's percentages. So think about this. You could use this same idea in a number of different ways, depending on what it is you want it to show an increase of. Here we're talking about CAGR, but you see you can use this type of idea in many different ways. So we've now defined all of our data series. By the way, why is this data series name CAGR? Because we're going to use the data series name as the data label for this particular data series. So that's why I create that data series name from that formula. So we've got all of our data series defined on our worksheet. Now we can go ahead and create the chart. Let me start by moving the existing chart down out of the way here. Okay. And we'll start by creating our cluster column chart. That's the easy part. Let's start with that first. I'm going to select the data here that I want to chart, and again, including this force 0 data series that is going to force that vertical axis at the 0. I'll go to my insert ribbon and my regular clustered column chart, and very simple there. Now you'll notice that the chart, the columns that you see are kind of to the left of the labels, and that is because the chart thinks that there are a set of columns with force 0, but it's 0, so it doesn't show the column. We're going to change that to a line chart because we can change what each data series chart type is. The way we do that is I'm going to go to select a column, any of the columns. I can click on it, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to say change series chart type. By doing that, I get what's known as the combo chart type dialog box. And it allows me down here to select the chart type for each data series. I will use the drop-down list, and I'll scroll down here to find I want it to be a line, so I'll select that. And you'll notice in the preview, it now moves the columns over because it says the force 0 is a line. Great, I'll click OK on that. And I will now format my columns so that they're wider and they have the data labels on top. So I'll press Control 1 to get my formatting task pane here. And to make them wider, I'll go ahead and set the gap width to, let's say, 100%. I only have 4 columns here, so I don't need it to be so wide. If I had maybe a dozen columns, then I would want to maybe move this down to 50 or 60%, so I have each of the columns showing large enough. I'll add some data labels, so I'll say let's use some data labels and let's put them outside the end. I will select the data labels so that the formatting task pane, if you don't have the formatting task pane open, just press Control 1 and it'll open it. In the label options here area, I'm going to say change the number to just say our number, so it has the commas, 0 decimal places, fairly standard stuff here. Then I will go ahead and I will remove the grid lines. I'll remove the legend. Don't need that either. I have a fairly standard formatted column chart, and that's where we start with. Now we need to add the CAGR line. Now, for those of you who are going to say in the comments, hey, Dave, you're showing quarters here, but CAGR is an annual growth rate, so you're not actually using it properly. Yes, I know that. I just picked these labels just to try to show you an example. So, don't feel you need to point that out in the comments under the video. Let's add the CAGR line. And this is the data down here. So how do I add another data series to a chart when it's not beside the data series that I'm using? It can't really be beside because it's a different chart type. It needs X and Y values. I go to the chart design ribbon. And on the chart design ribbon, I go to this particular button here, which says select data. And when I click on that, it opens the select data source dialog box. And you'll notice here it lists my 2 data series I have already, the units and force 0. But it also allows me to add a data series if I want. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the add data series. And you'll notice it only is showing or asking me for two things, the series name and the series values. Why isn't it asking me for both X and Y? Well, because Excel assumes that the data series you're adding is the same chart type as the immediately previous data series in this chart. So it thinks it's a line because the previous data series, the 40, is a line. Well, okay, we'll start with that and then we'll change the chart type because we know we can do that. I'll go ahead and series name it. Where is that? Okay, so I'll click on this cell. And the series values, the first thing to do whenever it puts something in here by default is to go ahead and delete that. You don't want anything in there. And I'm going to select the Y values because I know that's what it's going to use in the future. Then I'll click OK. And I'll click OK again. And now I need to change this particular chart type from a line to a scatter with straight lines. I'll select it, right click, and again change series chart type just like we did before. And this time I'm going to drop that down. Notice that it assumed it was a line because that was the previous data series. I'm going to scroll down here to find this one here that is scatter with straight lines. Click on that, say OK. But it didn't move it. Well, because we haven't told it where the X values are yet. No problem. We'll go back to the select data dialog, go to the CAGR line and say edit. Now it says, okay, where are the X values? So click into that field and I say the X values are here and click OK. Click OK, and now my line is where I want it to be. I'll select that line. The one thing I like to do is to add an arrow on the end just because it indicates direction. It makes it a little more meaningful for people. So I'll select that line. I'll go up to my chart format ribbon and in my shape outline here, I'll go down to the arrows and I'll add an arrow onto it. And there we go. We've added an arrow to our line. Now you notice because I'm using a scatter plot with straight lines type of chart, it has inputs of X and Y. This means you can decide, again, where you want that arrow to be. I'm only using 4 columns here because I'm trying to use a simple example for you. But just think, you can start to think about how might I use this where I have maybe 12 columns, but I only want the last 6. You can do that because you know the X values are the column numbers. So it starts to give you a lot more flexibility. Our last thing is to add our CAGR percentage label onto this line. So we need to add another data series again. I'll go back to my chart design ribbon, select data, and I will add another series. Notice how it adds the 3 things it's asking for, because again, it's assuming this is a scatter with straight lines. The series name, that's my calculated value here. The X values, there's only one of them. And the Y values, again, go ahead and delete that, and it's this one here. Click OK, click OK. I've now added that data series, but you don't see it. You don't see it because it's a single point on a line, a scatter with lines, so it doesn't show up. How do you select it? Because we want to add a data label to it. That's the great thing about charts. You can go to the chart format ribbon, and on the left-hand side of the chart format ribbon here, you'll notice this drop-down list. And in the drop-down list, what we can do is we can drop down, and it will now allow us to select any element of the slide, even if you can't see it. So I can select this series, CAGR 5.6%, and it has selected that series. Now I can add a data label. So I'll say add a data label, but I want to use the series name. So I'm going to have to go to the more options here. And in my more options, I'm going to, in what should it contain, I want it to have the series name. I don't want it to have the Y value. And I want it to be centered, so it's centered right where that label is. And I now have my CAGR centered there, but you can't really see it well because of the line. That's not a problem because we can format this label with a fill color, which means it is always going to be able to be seen. On my formatting the data labels, I'll go to my fill in line. I'll say I want a solid fill, and I'll select the white, which is the same color as the chart. And in the border, I want a solid line, and I'll select the gray, which is the same color as the line. Just make it more consistent that way. I can close the task pane here. Now you'll notice that it has formatted for us our column chart, but it has added the CAGR line with the label and it all updates as soon as the date updates. So instead of, let's say, 3015, let's say it was 3200, it is updated the CAGR, it's updated the columns, it changes all of it, including if that CAGR is actually negative. So instead of 3200, let's say it was 2200, it shows the minus. So what it does is it gives us this flexibility to have the CAGR line added onto a column chart. Now, of course, you want to make sure that the CAGR calculation, again, is accurate for whatever time periods you're using. I know I have an inconsistency here. Sorry about that. But the real message here is that you can create charts that automatically update, that have these meaningful callouts that give additional information to your audience. And it saves you a lot of time when you have to update this chart, or you have to create this chart for another either time period, series of products, locations, whatever it is. So use that when you want to make your charts more meaningful that are depicting growth rates along with values.
Some people might wonder, why didn't I just use a simple line graph instead of that scatter with straight lines to create the CAGR line? Well, because what I'm doing here is I'm previewing for you some skills that I share when I teach business professionals my Financial Viz course, which shows them skills that they can leverage. See, you can leverage your skills to create this type of visual that you see on the screen here. This is a visual that allows you to set which two columns you want to show the difference for, and it automatically calculates and positions that line and the difference label. All by learning these skills, the type of skills that I teach in my customized Financial Viz courses. So learn these skills and leverage them to create all sorts of effective financial visuals in Excel.
If you found this video helpful, there are 3 things you can do to help me out. First, click the like button below the video on YouTube. Second, leave a comment with any questions or feedback. And third, subscribe to my channel. Check out my websites and other videos with more tips and advice. Thanks again for watching.